This is my Mistform Ultimus Commander deck, and I built this one recently when I realized that even after all the decks I've built, I haven't actually tried to build a proper Voltron deck yet. And that seemed kind of strange because the whole 21 general damage thing is kind of one of the defining attributes in Commander. So Mistform Ultimus, he's basically just a 3/3 for 4 with Changeling. Seemingly not that exciting, but the reason I settled on this guy was, well, first of all, he's kind of a strange choice, so it's fun to choose a unique/random general every now and then. And also, I think he might be a little underrated. As boring as he seems, he interacts with basically every tribal card in existence, and tribal cards have been around for a while. And traditionally, tribal cards serve to pump up creatures, give them more resilience, more power, more abilities. And I figured, well, if I play with all these, fairy, wizard, merfolk, illusion tribal cards, then I can end up with one giant Mistform Ultimus because he interacts with all of those cards. So that's the theory anyways, and actually I think it turned out quite well. It's kind of a strange deck, but it functions pretty well as a Voltron build. I've got a ton of equipments, lords, and all sorts of stuff like tribal lands and sorceries, which will help to pump up a big giant Mistform Ultimus. And the goal of this deck is to get in for 21 general damage and kill each of my opponents one at a time. All the while running a lot of my traditional blue counterspells because I love running lots and lots of counterspells. So yeah, I guess this deck's got a few challenges ahead of it. First of all, it's trying to win the game with a vanilla 3/3. Voltron generals generally want at least something like haste or evasion or resiliency or at least a giant body, and Mistform Ultimus has none of those. So we have to figure out ways to deal with all of those problems. But yeah, that's part of the challenge of deck building, I guess. So I'll take you through this deck, and hopefully we can get a Mistform Ultimus Nation going, because he really is awesome, and it seems strange he's not getting played more often. So we'll start by taking a look at Mistform Ultimus, our commander. And there's really not a whole lot to talk about. He's pretty vanilla. He's a 3/3 for 4, and he is every creature type. So because we're going to try and go for the Voltron win, he's actually pretty important for the deck. Yeah, like I said before, we've got a lot of weaknesses to overcome. The most important thing is we need to find some way to give him evasion so that he's not getting chump blocked. So flying is a good one. Blue has lots of ways to give my creatures flying. You can also make them unblockable or give him trample. Usually the equipments and the lords that give him those abilities will also give him a nice power boost. And that's important too because a 3/3 is going to take a long time to deal 21 general damage. So that's the next thing we have to do. Pump up his power and toughness. Luckily, that's also pretty easy with all the equipments we're running. Also, he's lacking any sort of resiliency, so regeneration, indestructibility, those are really good things to have on a Voltron General just so he doesn't get killed over and over again. And the respawn tax can really add up, so it's nice to have a way to keep him on the board. Shroud and Hexproof, those are things that blue is pretty good at giving too. And the last thing is haste. Blue generally doesn't have a lot of ways to give creatures haste, but there are some equipments that can do that, and that's another really important thing for Voltron General, just so that you can bring him out, suit him up, and swing the turn that you play him, before anyone has a chance to kill him. So yeah, that's Mistform Ultimus. Generally he doesn't come with much, so you have to play with a lot of equipments. So the most obvious thing to do with Mistform Ultimus is run a bunch of lords. And you have quite a few to choose from. I'm only running 4, because I only really want the ones that give a relevant ability, besides just the +1/+1. So, like Marrow Regery, yeah, it gives him +1/+1, but the ability he gives, to tap a permanent isn't as relevant as these abilities here. So starting over here, we have Lord of the Unreal. He's a nice 2-drop. Illusion creatures you control get +1/+1 and have hexproof. So that's going to give me a little power boost and the resiliency that I need to make sure he doesn't get nuked with spot removal. Scion of Una, this one's pretty cool. He's got Flash, which is awesome in any blue deck because it's nice to leave your mana open and have a counterspell in hand rather than tapping out during your main phase. So Flash, other fairy creatures you control get +1/+1, and other fairies you control have Shroud, so that's another resiliency card. And yeah, I should mention at this point that Hexproof and Shroud, usually they're pretty close in most decks. In this deck, Hexproof is far, far better than Shroud because of all the equipments I'm running. So if I give Mistform Ultimus Shroud, then I better make sure that I don't have any equipments I want to equip to him. Otherwise, you know, he's going to be stuck as a 4/4 with Scion of Una out. So generally, I don't want to cast Scion of Una unless I'm satisfied with the number of equipments I already have on him. Lord of Atlantis, +1/+1 and Island Walk. Evasion, like I said before, is one of the most important things you need for Mistform Ultimus. Island Walk is obviously not universal evasion, but there's always a blue player, and generally he deserves to die first, so Island Walk is good. And then Merfolk Sovereign, another guy who gets +1/+1, and this has probably the best evasion ability you can ask for. Tap, target Merfolk creature is unblockable this turn. So even flyers won't be able to block Mistform Ultimus now. Okay, and you also have access to all of the champion creatures. And champion has always been an interesting mechanic in EDH because there's a ton of wrath effects, and champion will often serve to protect one of your creatures so that it will come back after the next Wrath of God or something. So, yeah, it's a difficult mechanic to pull off, but it's usually worth it in the end. Start here with Mistbind Clique. So for 4 mana you get a 4/4, and you get to tap someone down for the turn. Champion a fairy. Mistform Ultimus is a fairy, so I will almost always have a fairy out. And the fact that he has flash means that I can use this to protect Mistform Ultimus from random spot removal, and at the same time tap down the player who ever thought it would be funny to destroy Mistform Ultimus. So this is a pretty useful ability, and I guess the cool thing about championing Mistform Ultimus is that I can just put him into the command zone if I choose to. And then we have this guy, Wanderwine Prophets. For 6 mana, champion a Merfolk. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice a Merfolk. If you do, take an extra turn after this one. So the cool thing about Wanderwine Prophets is I can champion Mistform Ultimus, put him in the command zone, then recast Mistform Ultimus and sacrifice him every turn to keep stringing together extra turns. So yeah, that seems pretty cool. I should admit that this is actually really bad. Like, don't get your hopes up that you're going to pull off this janky combo here anytime soon. I'm just running it because it's hilarious, and it's actually got an even more hilarious combo with another card I'm going to talk about later. But for now, it's just a really funny card that happens to have synergy with my general. Okay, and rounding out the rest of my creatures are some random good stuff cards. I actually made a concerted effort to not put a ton of good stuff into this deck. I wanted to avoid the staples. Didn't work so well. There's still a lot of staples in this deck, but whatever. Trinket Mage, yeah, he's a staple, and I have the obvious targets, Soul Ring and Sensei's Divining Top, but he's actually even better than that in this deck because he can fetch some really good equipments. A couple of my equipments are 1-drops, and they're pretty devastating with Mistform Ultimus. So Trinket Mage is better than he is in most other decks. Snapcaster Mage, I just like him, that's why he's in here. I have a lot of counter spells and stuff like Mystical Tutor, and a bunch of other really cool spells that want flashback. Blue, I guess, doesn't have a ton of graveyard interaction, so he's kind of a rare breed in that respect. And I've never really liked Relearn and those kind of cards, so I like Snapcaster. To Fairy, he's going to help protect Mistform Ultimus from instant speed removal, and as a blue deck, I always like being the only one who can interact with the stack, so he's good. Yeah, Consecrated Sphinx, he's pretty fantastic in any blue deck, so why not? This deck does need card draw. Glenelendra Archmage, again, just a random good stuff card. You got 2 counter spells on a stick, and, you know, if you can abuse him with a Riptide Lab or something, then that's even better. And Cephalid Constable. So for 3 mana, you get a 1/1, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, return up to X target permanents to that player's hand. I actually just added this to the deck like 20 minutes ago. I was flipping through my stack of blue cards, trying to see if I had a recurring insight, because I thought this deck needed more card draw, and I saw this thing, and I'm like, holy crap. This deck is full of equipments. I have like 20 equipments in this deck, and a lot of them give the creature evasion, or like trample or whatever, and yeah, I guess suiting up a Cephalid Coliseum is pretty hilarious, and by Coliseum I mean Constable. So yeah, we'll see how this works out. Like, I just added it, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be hilarious. So about those equipments, I do run a lot of them, and there are a ton of equipments to choose from, so the criteria I used are, I guess I don't want to spend a ton of mana on my equipments. They have to be efficient. You know, you can run stuff like Sword of Cauldra or Argentum Armor, and those are good cards in this format, but for a Voltron deck, I think they're kind of slow. I want equipments that are going to, you know, be castable and will I'll be able to attach them to Mistform Ultimus by turn 5. So he's a huge threat early in the game rather than having to wait with these clunky cards in my hand and on the battlefield. All of my equipments need to solve at least one of my problems of, Mistform Ultimus has no resiliency, no haste, and no evasion. And hopefully they'll give a pretty sizable power boost, like a good mana cost to power boost ratio. Okay, so we'll start over here. We have Oneginata, and this is a pretty solid card for any deck with a Voltron General having at least 3 power, because for just a 1+2 mana investment, I can turn Mistform Ultimus into a 6/3, which is pretty solid. And in this deck, it's pretty cool because that is a trinket. I can get that with Trinket Mage. Sword of Feast and Famine. I'm actually not crazy about the swords in Voltron decks, because for a 5 mana investment, you only get a 2 power boost, which is kind of small. And the protections are nice, but generally I want a little bit more for 5 mana. But the reason I like this one is because of the untap all my lands ability, which is great for a mono blue deck because I probably have to tap out during my main phase too much, and it's nice to be able to untap those lands and have them open for counterspells. So I do like Sword of Feast and Famine. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, these are pretty solid choices. For a pretty low mana investment, I get Haste and Shroud or Hexproof. Yeah, generally I'm not a fan of Swiftfoot Boots because that extra 1 mana really does make a difference. But like I said before, Hexproof is so much better than Shroud in this deck because of all the equipments I have to attach to my general. Lightning Greaves isn't that big of a deal because at least I can equip it to another creature for free so that I can target Mistform for a turn, but that's not an ideal solution. Cloak and Dagger and Obsidian Battle Axe. These are the tribal equipments for Morningtide, and they're pretty efficient because Mistform Ultimus is a rogue and a warrior, so I get to attach them for free when Mistform comes into play, and they both give a fairly substantial power bonus. An extra 2 damage is very nice. Cloak and Dagger will give Shroud, and Obsidian Battle Axe will give Haste. So those are both 2 things that I like a lot on Mistform Ultimus. Next we have Diviner's Wand. This is one of my favorite equipments in the deck, actually. So it has a lot going on. I get to attach for free, just like the Cloak and Dagger and Obsidian Battle Axe. And it gives him, whenever I draw a card, this creature gets +1/+1 and gains flying. And I can pay 4 mana to draw a card. So it gives him evasion. The flying is sort of hidden there amongst a whole bunch of other abilities, but it's very important on this card. And +1/+1 whenever I draw a card, that's pretty huge because I'm playing a blue deck, I have a lot of card draw, so I can drop something like an Opportunity, and that's a giant instant speed buff for Mistform Ultimus that someone probably didn't see coming. And then the extra bonus here, pay 4 mana to draw a card. That's huge because I'm playing mono blue, have access to all those mana doublers, and if I have Diviner's Wand on Mistform Ultimus plus a Cage Sun out, then that's pretty lethal. So this is one of my favorite cards in the deck. It's definitely a fun card to have out, and it helps that Mistform Ultimus is a wizard. Next we have Oathkeeper Takino's Daisho. Kind of a really weird card. So for 3 mana and 2 to equip, +3/+1, that's a pretty solid power bonus for a Voltron deck. Whenever a equipped creature is put into a graveyard, return that card to play under your control if it's a samurai. And when Oathkeeper is put into a graveyard from play, remove the equipped creature from the game. So, yeah, I like this card for the power boost, that's pretty decent. And it's going to offer Mistform Ultimus some resiliency, which is always hard to come by in this form. And Oathkeeper is just kind of a hilarious card in general because I think there's all sorts of combo potential around this. Some sort of sack outlet, or I don't know, there's got to be some way to combo with this. I like it with Wanderwine Prophets. That's kind of janky, but basically I can chain together infinite turns because my general is a samurai and a merfolk. Yeah, so it's a pretty solid card. Not great, but I think there's all the potential in the world with this thing. Now we're getting into the really nasty Voltron equipments. These are some of the best ones. Strata Scythe, always good if you're playing a monocolored Voltron deck. So for 3 and 3, I get to imprint an island, and then Mistform gets +1/+1 for each island on the battlefield. So even including my opponents. So that's a huge power boost for a 6 mana investment. Late in the game, that's potentially giving +12/+12 or something, depending on how many blue players there are. So this is definitely one of the most lethal equipments in the deck. And so is Imperial Plate. This actually is really good with Diviner's Wand, obviously. So for only 2 to cast and 2 to equip, equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each card in your hand. In a blue Voltron deck, obviously that's pretty good because I have lots of card draw, and I'm keeping my hand pretty stocked. So yeah, this is one of the most amazing cards to have in your opening hand because you're probably going to have a 9/9 Mistform Ultimus on turn 5, and yeah, just a really solid card. And one of my favorites, Sigil of Distinction. Yeah, +1/+1 counter is equal to how much mana you put into it, and it has no equip cost. Basically, it has an equip cost of 1 because you're going to pay that extra in the X. And yeah, this is just one of the best equipments for a mana cost to power ratio. So, like late in the game, you can dump 8 mana into this, and it's a devastating equipment to have. Or, you know, early in the game, it's okay to drop this for, 4 or 5, and then equip it for a +4 or +3 bonus. So that's pretty amazing. And yeah, the other thing, this counts as a trinket too, because I can search up X cards with Trinket Mage. So that's pretty fantastic as well. So before equipments, there were auras, and auras are generally pretty terrible because it's easy to get 2 for 1, but some of them are pretty okay. So here we have Pemin's Aura. For 3 mana, we're going to get all of the Morphling abilities, and this is going to help us solve a lot of the problems that Mistform Ultimus has. I can give him Flying, so there's our Evasion, and I can give him Shroud for 1 turn, so that's our Resiliency, and that's really good that I can just give it for 1 turn on demand, so that's not going to have horrible synergy with all the equips and stuff in the deck. And then for 1 mana, I can pump his power. Depending on what equipments and what other auras I have, I can use that more than just twice in a turn, so that's potentially a huge power bonus. Next we have Zephyr's Embrace. This was kind of a random gem I had just by searching through all the blue auras, and I eventually got to the end, to the Z, and finally found a good one. So for 4 mana, enchanted creature gets +2/+2, gains Flying and Shroud. That seems pretty efficient. That's going to solve 3 of the problems. Flying will give us Evasion, Shroud is some Resiliency, and +2/+2 is a pretty solid power bonus. So, pretty vanilla card, but I think it's good enough. Drake Umbra. So for 5 mana, enchanted creature gets +3/+3, Flying, and Totem Armor. So that's a pretty big power bonus. That's going to turn Mistform into a dragon, and the Evasion is nice. And Totem Armor is a pretty unique Resiliency ability. That's basically free regeneration, so that's going to protect him from all destroy effects. Pretty good. These ones are all going to sort of go against the traditional auras are opening yourself up to 2 for 1 thing, because they're all going to give him a Shroud of some sort or protection, and that's going to stop him from getting nuked by removal, hopefully. And then Eldrazi Conscription. You don't really need to be playing Voltron to make Eldrazi Conscription good, but it seems like an obvious choice in this deck. So for 8 mana, +10/+10, Trample and Annihilator. So yeah, obviously this is going to be the most dangerous card on the board if it hits, and I'm potentially one-shotting someone with this if I've already done some general damage to them. So blue is always good at card draw, and this deck does need card draw because I want to keep drawing all those equipments. So we have Fact or Fiction, very efficient spell for 4 mana at instant speed. I'm going to get hopefully the best cards out of my top 5. And then Tidings, very efficient at 5 mana, get 4 cards at sorcery speed. Opportunity will give me 4 cards at instant speed for 6. And Sensei's Divining Top and Future Sight, these are both pretty amazing cards all on their own, and they turn into a broken combo when put together. So there's not much else you can ask for there. And I've got my tutor effects. Mystical Tutor is always very awesome. I've got more than just the boring counter spells in this deck. I've got quite a few interesting targets for him. Some of the tribal sorceries you're going to see in a minute. Fabricate. With all those equipments, this is going to be very good in this deck. So I'm generally going to get whatever my scariest equipment is at the time, or like Oblivion Stone or a Mana Rock. So Fabricate's pretty good at any of those situations. And then Knowledge Exploitation. This is kind of a tutor. It's one of the nastiest cards in the format, I think, depending on what your opponent's deck is. So Prowl is a tribal ability for rogues, and of course my general is a rogue. So whenever Mistform Ultimus deals damage to someone, I can Prowl this out to search the deck for a sorcery and cast it, instant or sorcery. This is going to be pretty nasty if I can get like a Storm Herd or, I don't know, Decree of Pain. There's all sorts of nasty crap people are running. Hopefully I know what's in someone's deck. And yeah, this is definitely a very fun card to run too, but it's the kind of thing that can really end the game. depending on what people have. Next we have some random utility. Capsize, this is always awesome. One of the very few good balanced cards in this format. The buyback is pretty amazing. Jace the Mind Sculptor, yeah, he's got a lot of stuff. Generally he's going to be useful all the time. This is really just sort of a good stuff filler card until I can find something more interesting, more on theme. But for now he's pretty good. And next we have some sweeper effects. All decks need them, and fortunately all decks have access to them because there are a number of these in colorless. So Oblivion Stone is one of the best. 3 to cast, 5 to blow up, makes this an 8 mana Wrath effect. Sometimes the fake counters come in handy, but usually not. All is Dust, this is a sorcery that I can tutor up with Mystical Tutor. So for 7 mana, each player sacrifices all colored permanents he or she controls. So that gets around indestructibility and like regeneration and stuff. This is really good in this deck because this is going to stop all my equipment from getting blown up. Yeah, it's going to kill Mistform Ultimus, but I'll be able to bring him back, hopefully suit him up with like a Obsidian Battle Axe or something and give him haste, and he'll be back to his smashing ways in no time. So yeah, All is Dust, really good in a deck full of artifacts. Who knew? Some more random cards here. Notorious Throng, another one of those Prowl cards. So this is one that actually has different effects depending on whether I pay the Prowl cost. So put X, 1/1 Black Fairy Rogue creature tokens into play, where X is the number of damage dealt to your opponents this turn. So casting this thing without Prowl is pretty useless. I don't really care about the fairies that much, although sometimes they can be useful depending on how much I've just smashed with Mistform Ultimus for. But if I pay the Prowl cost, I get to take an extra turn. So that's pretty fantastic. Extra turns are really great in this deck because Mistform Ultimus generally only needs to hit 2, 3, maybe 4 times to kill someone, so if I can like surprise them with an extra combat step that they weren't expecting, then I can finish someone off pretty quickly. So depending on how many fairies I get, maybe I can kill someone with regular damage too, if I can suit them up with equipments, or I don't know, if you're running Coat of Arms, I guess that can be pretty insane. So that's fun, and it's another way I can interact with Mistform's tribal abilities. And like, I swear I tried to make this deck not full of good stuff. I tried to cut down the staples, so why am I running these? They actually have awesome synergy with Mistform Ultimus. 2 extra turns. I'm not using this for like combo shenanigans or anything. I just want to attack 2 more times, and that's usually enough to kill someone. So that's why I have Time Stretch. So I'm not doing anything horribly insufferable with it. I'm just killing people. Rite of Replication. This is a hilarious card in this deck. Because I'm running all those lords, like Rite of Replicating a Scion of Una gives me 6/6/6 Shroud Fairies, or like Lord of the Unreal. Like, there's all kinds of stupid things you can do with this card. Yeah, most of the time it's going to be targeting one of my lords, or I guess I can target one of my opponent's creatures. It's just a really good card in this deck. An alternate win condition for sure, because Voltron decks generally need to have at least a few plan Bs. Okay, next we have Counterspells. I'm going pretty light on counters in this deck. I'm only running 11. I think that's enough. You really need to run a bunch to protect Voltron generals, because a lot of people are going to be trying to kill them, and it's nice to have counter magic to back that up. So the best counterspells you can run for Voltron, I think, are free ones, because you're going to be tapping out for like equips and casting your general during your main phase, so it's nice to have some protection up without having to leave islands open. So Pact of Negation is pretty fantastic. This will randomly lose you games from time to time, but it's worth it, I think. Force of Will, it's only going to cost me 1 card and 1 life. Pretty hard to hard cast at 5 mana though. Foil is actually a little easier to hard cast at 4, so that makes a big difference. But it's nice in mono blue because I'm running a ton of islands, so the alternate casting cost is really not that hard. Foil really needs to see a lot more play. It's an excellent card, especially if you can't get your hands on a Pact of Negation or Force of Will. And then we just have some super efficient ones here. Arcane Denial and Counterspell, 2 of the few counterspells which will be a hard counter at only 2 mana, so those are both pretty excellent. Forbid is always nasty because it has buyback, so this is going to be a repeatable counterspell for only 3 mana. And then we have Spell Crumple and Hinder. These are good because you can tuck away someone's general and it won't come back for the rest of the game. That's pretty mean. I'm only going to do that if I really don't want to play against a certain general. At the very least, these are awesome for graveyard decks because it means I get to put something at the bottom of someone's deck instead of in their graveyard. So that's pretty good. For the same reason that Fairy Trickery and Dissipate are good, I get to exile spells instead of putting them into the graveyard, so they're going to be gone for good. And then Cryptic Command, just a fantastic counterspell. You should note that I don't run counterspells that cost more than 4. This is the only thing that I'll run that costs more than 3 mana, actually. I value efficient counterspells over big splashy ones. So, you know, no overwhelming intellect or spelljack for me. If it costs 4 mana, it better be called Cryptic Command, otherwise it's a bit too expensive, I think. And Mana Rocks are next. This deck is very mana hungry because I do need to recast Mistform Ultimus for a lot of mana sometimes. Sometimes I'll have to pay 12 or something, so it's nice to actually be able to afford that. Sol Ring, obvious choice, and mercifully more accessible now that they were reprinted in the Commander box set. Thran Dynamo, a very efficient one for 4 mana, it taps for 3. Urgolem's Eye, pretty atrocious. I have a lot of decks and only so many mana rocks, so I generally need to resort to some pretty bad ones sometimes. And if you have to choose between running no mana rocks and running bad ones, you know, run the bad ones, there's no shame. And then all the mana doublers, these are obvious choices in any monocolored deck. Yeah, Cage Sun is pretty fantastic, and Gauntlet of Power, they'll both give me an extra power boost from Mistform Ultimus, which is not irrelevant. Extraplanar Lens is starting to see less play, because, I don't know, people are afraid of losing their land or something. Yeah, that happens, but it's still a fantastic card. Doubling all of your mana is pretty amazing, so it's worth it to get the third effect to run the Extraplanar Lens. On to the mana base. I'm running 12 non-basics. That's a bit more than I like to run in a monocolor deck, because you really want to be able to get full value out of stuff like Strata Scythe, Cage Sun, Extraplanar Lens. So I try to keep the non-basics to a minimum, but there are just so many that Mistform Ultimus has access to. There are a lot of tribal-themed non-basic lands, so it's a good idea to run those. So for example, Blinkmoth Nexus and Mishra's Factory, they can both turn into creatures, which is kind of useful because I have a lot of equipments, so these are kind of plan Bs. I'm mostly running these for these extra abilities, because my general is a Blinkmoth / Assembly Worker, so that's just an extra bit of pump right there, which is nice. There's one more land that has an effect like this called Griffin Canyon. I don't have one because it's from like Mirage, Weatherlight, one of those sets from a long time ago. Anyways, it's tap, target Griffin gets +1/+1 and untap it, which is hilarious. So it's even better than these, I think, because it gives your Mistform Ultimus pseudo-vigilance. And then this hilarious card here, Swarmyard, because my general is a rat spider, I can regenerate it. So one of my lands will give my general some nice resilience there. Riptide Lab, some more resilience. I actually have a lot of wizards in the deck, so this is for more than just my general. I can use this to recur Glenelender Archmage or Snapcaster Mage or something. So that's pretty solid. Mutavaults. Yeah, I don't know why this is in here. I guess it's going to interact with all those tribal cards just as my general does. So this is potentially a huge threat, I guess. It's going to benefit from all the lords and everything, so, you know, why not? Hall of the Bandit Lord. This is a fantastic card that needs to be in most decks, especially in a deck like this where I really rely on giving my general haste, so that's pretty good. Temple of the False God and Ancient Tomb, both amazing cards. These should probably go in most decks, although it's kind of hard to come by Ancient Tomb these days. Mana Excel on a land is always great. Buried Ruin and Academy Ruins. These are going to give me some ways to interact with my graveyard. And I have a lot of artifacts in this deck, so these actually do a lot of overtime, especially bringing back some of those really dangerous equipments that people are oh so afraid of. Strip Mine, pretty obvious choice, you need land destruction in any deck. And Vesuva, because why not? It's going to copy a Mishra's Factory, so I can do some more tapping. And 26 basic islands. Woohoo! Okay, so that's the deck. And this one plays pretty straightforwardly. You're going to want to open with, hopefully, one of these cheap and efficient equipments. I really like the cheap ones because it guarantees that I'm going to actually have a bunch of these on Mistform Ultimus by the time he's ready to attack. So the Morningtide Tribal ones are excellent. Cheap ones like Oneginata, those are good. It is a mana-hungry deck, so be prepared to run some crappy mana rocks and the mana doublers as well. Basically, I'm going to want to get Mistform Ultimus out as soon as possible. Turn 4 is good if I can. And then once he's out, I need to start solving these 3 problems that he has. So lack of evasion, I can solve that with a lot of the lords will help give him flying or unblockability, or maybe stuff like auras to give him flying. I need to give him haste if possible. That's not a huge problem, but it'll get some extra damage in. And some resilience is nice too. So shroud effects, regeneration, or totem armor. And then I can worry about giving him some massive power boost, because a 3/3 for 4 is not that efficient. My favorite Voltron equipments, Sigil of Distinction, Stratascythe, and Imperial Plate, those are the ones that are going to do some heavy-duty damage for a pretty efficient mana cost. Now, because we're a blue deck, we get to do stuff like extra turns, card draw, and counterspells, all of which are very good in a Voltron deck, I think. Counterspells, you're going to want to go for free ones, cheap ones, efficient ones, stuff like Teferi to help you control the stack. And as with any Voltron deck, you need to deal with the possibility that you're not going to have access to your general, either because he costs a ton of mana, or because he's getting hindered or something. So you need a plan B of some sort. I have a lot of creatures and a lot of equipment, so I can always win by suiting up something else. But, you know, hilarious win conditions like Rite of Replication on a Lord is going to work very well. Or, like, I can't wait to try out this Cephalid Constable. That's going to work so well. But at the end of the day, just play lots of hilarious tribal effects. Do whatever you think is funny, because it is supposed to be kind of a casual general, although I found that it works very well. So it's sort of transcended the casual deck at this point, and it's becoming a pretty feared deck, I think. Maybe because it's mono blue, but probably because, you know, he looks so evil. I mean, look at that. How can he not be good?